They took my daughter. The phone call came at 3:47 p.m., a sound that split the afternoon like a gunshot. Rachel's voice raw and ragged. The bus driver's Jack said between sobs, the impossible smallness of a child gone. For a moment there was only sound. The rasp of her breath, the road outside, the distant clack of a neighbor's lawnmower that suddenly felt obscene. David Reaper Stone's blood turned to ice and his hands went small and useless for one breath before memory and training and something older, fatherhood, took over. The walk from the bus stop to Rachel's house was 300 feet of quiet that suddenly tasted like splinters. Lily's backpack found in the bushes was the first punctuation. Canvas scraped, zipper half open, Mr. Buttons missing. The bear he had sewn a tiny tracker into on a winter night when Rachel wanted nothing to do with plans or promises anymore. Just in case. That night's tender paranoia became today's only lifeline. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Loom. The steel demons did not hesitate. 40 bikes filled the street in minutes, chrome and leather and helmets like black storms, engines a chorus of intent. They moved like a single creature toward Rachel's house, a roar that carved a path through regular suburban disbelief. David broke every law on the drive to Highway 9 because rules are paper and children are not. Tank, snake, diesel, men whose faces you'd expect to see carved in a bar, not on a mission, watched a blue dot crawl along a map on a cracked phone. The dot moved north, 35, 40 miles out, and all the names on those roads meant one thing: Carlos El Lobo Mendez. Carlos, with his sharp-shouldered suits and easy corruption and the smell of fear, he sold like product to a town that had tried to look away. The club had told him no. He had answered with a line drawn through a little girl's life. David called Carlos because some priests and judges and social workers had tried to make a world where men like Carlos could be stopped with paper and prison. David wanted answers while Rachel wanted a child. The dealer laughed. The laugh was a sound that could be soaked up and stored. He bargained with steel and souls for years and treated people like inventory. Bring me $100,000 and sign your shop over, or she disappears, he said, the words flat as a dropped coin. The spot David agreed to meet was a stage set for two realities: the old warehouse on Miller Road where Carlos wanted to make the exchange, and an abandoned building 20 meters from the warehouse where the tracker pinged like a small hopeful heartbeat. Diesel surveillance said 15 men at the warehouse. The phones said more. But the phones could not measure a father's particular gravity. Then Detective Tom Miller rode up to the clubhouse, a badge-tight face and a man who had once been a policeman until his partner's death became another unsolved ledger in a town that did not always keep its books. He threw his badge down like a confession and said something that tipped the scale. Carlos had 14 other children somewhere. Trafficking, not a one-off ransom. The room that had been filled with immediate, hot plans for a single rescue expanded, furious and meticulous, into something larger. The anger was not triumph, it was focus. People who had been judged by the world felt again like guardians. The decision was made to turn the city into a map with safe and not safe, and then to redraw it. The plan was as elegant as it was savage in its precision. Make Carlos think he had a duel, make him vulnerable, while the real cavalry walked into the place the cartel thought they protected. David rode to the warehouse alone because the place is cruelly better bait when it looks like a lone man with trembling hands and a vow. His brothers took other roads toward the other building, toward the blue dot that tracked a tiny stuffed heart. Engines whispered through night like approaching thunder. When David walked into the warehouse, 30 men glared like vultures. He told them exactly what he had to say, because sometimes words are the slowest weapons and the fastest promises. He asked for Lily. Carlos smirked and tried to convert a child's life into leverage. That's when the sound came. Not just 40 voices and 40 engines, but 200. From 3 states, clubs David had never needed until that afternoon. Biker patches folded into a single phrase: "Protect our children." And the roar was a moral language everyone in that parking lot understood. The other building, the one with the whittled paint and a hallway that smelled like forgotten things, opened into a scene that lodged like a splinter. 14 kids, ages 6 to 12, tied and terrified but breathing. A chorus of small hands and slammed silence. Lily huddled in a corner clutching Mr. Buttons, one eye swollen with salt and resolve. When Tank, who could pull a grin out of a cemetery, sat with her and whispered the plain truth. Daddy's friends are here, you're safe now. The child's shoulders uncurled like a bird remembering it still could fly. The club moved through the rooms with the tenderness of persons who had been hardened by choice. Somebody had to be kind and firm in the same breath, to tell small bodies that their bones would be mended by people who might not know how to hold a spoon properly but knew how to keep a promise. The cartel's backup arrived fast and furious. 30 men with guns and something like desperation in their stride. But desolation cannot outpace a community's righteous speed. The fight that followed was brutal in noise and structure but not gory. The thump of boots, the tang of adrenaline, the shouted orders woven into calls to protect, to extract, to shield small bodies. These men were not soldiers of glory. They were fathers and mothers' brothers and neglected sons who had decided to put themselves between predators and children. The cartel ran like men whose mathematics finally accounted for a variable they thought they owned, human fury. Carlos tried to flee in the parking lot and was corralled by hands that had loved and lost, hands that refused to let his cruelty continue. David dragged him into an empty warehouse and closed a door on a man who had meant to turn small lives into profit. What happened behind that closed door is a thing that long nights make private. David emerged with a face like a man who had slept through a storm and knew the rain had cleansed nothing and everything. He said simply, "I made sure he could never hurt another child," and left the rest in the shadows where men bury certain truths. Police arrived to a tableau that required explanation. 15 children safe, 30 cartel members bound like ragged ornaments, and a man named Carlos confessing to crimes that had once been rumors whispered over fences. The evidence in the warehouse was undeniable: drugs, ledgers, photos, and the justice system, for once, worked its slow, creaky gears in a way that felt like a miracle. Carlos received life without parole. His empire collapsed like a rotten scaffold when money stopped whispering promises. In prison, he did not become a martyr or a myth. He became a cautionary footnote whose existence was kept heavy by inmates who had their own code. The community watched the machinery of law do what it could, and outside of it the steel demons continued to do what the law could not: stay, guard, rebuild trust. But the rescue did not close like a neat film reel. Lily's body was unbroken, but her nights were long. Nightmares peeled away with time and patience. The steel demons learned how to stand sentinel outside Rachel's porch until sleep returned to a little girl's face. The other children were reunited with families, some blood, some adopted by club members who wore cufflinks and tattoos and a kind of fierce tenderness. And the clubs formed an informal network for watchers and finders and people who would not let a child disappear into a ledger again. Detective Miller left the badge he had once trusted and became a private investigator who could move differently, who could trace a child's shadow and not apologize for bending rules that protected small bodies. The warehouse where Carlos had once made decisions was demolished. On that scar of earth, the bikers built a playground with slides and swings and a plaque that read, "Quietly, we remember to protect." There is irony in a place that once detained little lives becoming a place where they could laugh. Justice was given its due in courtrooms and in the quiet rituals of a community that would not forget. The cartel's men were scattered, their logic dissolving when confronted with a united front that had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Carlos, broken in ways that matched his crimes, lived but in a life that daily reminded him of the ledger he had created. Every year he received a photograph of Lily growing up, happier, safer, surrounded by the armors of leather and care, with a note that said, succinctly, "She survived. You won't." Sometimes justice is a legal sentence, sometimes it is a life remade, and sometimes it is a group of imperfect people who decide that love is the only law necessary. Months turn to years. Lily, now 13, keeps Mr. Buttons close. The bear still has the tracker sewn into its ear and a panic button that has only ever been used by accident and trembling. David watches her learn to ride a bike with training wheels that look like small chrome engines. And the steel demons show up not to intimidate but to picnic and teach and fix bikes for kids who have never had the chance. The club's identity shifted from mere image to guardianship. They learned to channel their bruising force into something steady and legal when possible, extra-legal only when the world left no other option. They saved 87 children in 5 years. Numbers that would make headlines but never capture the trembling, the long conversations at night, the therapy appointments, the reconstructing of trust. Not all stories end tidy, but many end with justice and repair and the slow, communal work of mending. Near the emotional ending of Lily's first year of high school, when the playground the bikers built rang with afternoon laughter and the town had learned to look each other in the face, David stood under a sunset that painted chrome like liquid gold. He thought about fathers who ask questions no one can answer, about the men who joined him on that day and the children they had saved, and about the private price one pays when doing what must be done. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment, and tell us where you're watching from so we can appreciate you. He did not tell anyone everything he had done in that empty warehouse. Sometimes silence keeps a man, and sometimes it keeps him dangerous in the way the world needs. But he did teach Lily to be brave, to choose kindness, to know the names of people who would fight for her even if those people had tattoos and bad table manners. Years from that night, the battery of dads who once rode for speed now rode for school runs and fundraisers, for the small things that stitch a town back together. Carlos Mendes still existed in a body that was a smaller version of the man he had been. The rest of the world had made its own judgments. The plaque at the playground did not mention violence, only choices we choose to protect. The truth is more complicated than a line on a stone, but it held. In the quiet that followed every storm, those dinners, those nights of watch, those little hands that finally learned to sleep through the dark, David learned what many men discover too late, that the biggest strength is the capacity to stand guard for the fragile things. He had once sworn to protect his daughter with everything. He found that in protecting her he had built a net wide enough to catch other lives, and that the community he had been part of had been remade into a place where, for all its scars, a child could choose to laugh without counting the cost.